Hi, this is Carol from Crinkled Path. Welcome back to my channel, and I wanted to share today how the journals that I have been making, how I've been teaching people to use them. And this is a big motivation for why I make journals, and up to this point I have only made custom journals for particular people who my husband and I have walked through a healing process with through the ministry that we do. And I am not a licensed counselor. I have just had training in relational care. And so I thought I would share some of the practical things that anybody can do to help walk through their own healing and how journaling plays a part in that. And I'm very interested in starting to make journals that pretty much anybody could pick up and use in this way, and could add some of their own things. So I have basically taken the pages out of this Reader's Digest condensed book by cutting them away from the spine very carefully without cutting the back of the spine. And I just love that a lot of these have these neat patterns and prints on their covers, and those are my favorite. And our thrift store sells these very cheaply and sometimes gives them away on their freebie rack. And then I'll go through some of the pages in a minute that I'm going to be adding into these journals just to show you what the base journal is going to look like for me. But I thought that I'd share the process a bit, how you can walk through helping yourself to heal or help somebody else. First, you want to record your story. Your story matters, and how you respond to it and how honest you are about looking at it and your ability to then tell it is very important to the healing process. One of the ways you can record your story would be through something called life mapping. And there's books on this, but the basic premise that anybody could do is think back in memory, record an event that you remember, good or bad, try and give it some kind of indicator on a timeline. Give a date, you could give your age, you could give a time in life like this happened in junior high or this happened in 4th grade. And don't get too hung up on exactly, but as long as you can put it in line with other things as you remember more, that's what's important. You're going to record what the event was. You're going to honestly look back and try and remember what emotions you were feeling at that time and record them. And then you need to try and be as honest with yourself as possible and give your interpretation of how you responded and how that event shaped you. The more we're aware, the more we'll manage our emotions in a healthy way, and your interpretation of the event may have led you to guard or make proclamations that you were never going to do something again or never going to allow something again. It may have changed the way you feel about yourself, and that's what you want to record. And then once you have your life mapping complete, your story is recorded, and this happens over a series of time, and maybe you want this in just a plain notebook. Maybe you want it in a journal. Any place you can write it down is wonderful. But then the next step, so this is 1, is recording your story. Number 2 is telling your story. Now you want to find a trusted confidant. You don't tell your story to just everybody, and you want to set up guidelines for the person you tell your story to, and maybe you want to reverse roles and have them share their story as well. But the guidelines are based on, for us, Romans 12:15, which says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep." So you want to choose somebody who's willing to respond productively to your pain or your victories in life. And so one of the ways you can do this is to make sure that you set up the ground rules for productive responding before you start to share. And you can extend this to people because people do feel very cared for when we give productive responding. The easiest way to describe productive responding is that it is a heart-to-heart connection. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. So if somebody shares good news, you're going to be happy with them. You're going to try and connect with the positivity that they're having and reflect that back to them. The same thing when somebody is sad. You're going to try and reflect back in your conversation that you understand what they're feeling. The things we avoid when we're trying to give good heart-to-heart connection are things that would be considered head-to-head connection, which are things like logic. This is reasoning, giving facts, making excuses. Criticism. Things like, well, if you had just done this, then that wouldn't have happened to you. Complaints. This is one-upping. When somebody shares with you their pain and your response is, well, you think you've got it bad, you should have seen what happened to me, or you should have heard what happened to me. That is complaint. There's also neglect. This is when somebody shares something with you and they get no response back from you. Either you ignore it completely or you walk away without any response. Another one is sarcasm and humor. This is often our response when we feel uncomfortable about something that somebody shares with us, and we want to avoid doing this just because we're feeling awkward, and we want to learn to go back to doing heart to heart, just really trying to empathize or be happy in the situation that they're sharing in response to what they're sharing. The last one is advice. We also, in our circles, call this spiritual pep talks. This is when we go straight to fixing people or quoting a scripture or telling them you're going to pray for them, but then not actually giving any compassion. So these are some of the don't do's when you are trying to offer care to somebody, and it's certainly not anything you want somebody that you're asking to listen to your story to respond with to you. So these are part of setting up ground rules when you tell your story. So you understand, you might want a church leader, you might want a good friend, might want your spouse, but you definitely want a trusted confidant to be the person who's willing to listen to you say, hey, let's share our stories together and let's talk about what happened so that we can heal, but let's set up these ground rules. The next thing you're going to do is receive care. And how that happens is through those heart-to-heart statements. My heart is really broken for you right now, or I can imagine you feel this way based on what you just shared with me, or wow, that's incredible that that happened to you and you had this wonderful experience and this blessing from that. So that's statements of care. The next thing you're going to do is exercise gratitude. For all the bad things that happen to us in life, and bad things happen to everybody, whether it came upon us by our own choices, or it was a fluke of nature, or it was somebody else hurting us. No matter what happens, we all have pain. But if we hold on to it, it builds up like sludge and it pulls us down, and we have to receive care in order to remove the sludge. But then once we receive care, we can see more positives from our past, especially when our hurt parts of our past get healed. I have personally experienced this, that the more the negative parts of my life get healed spiritually, emotionally, the more grateful I am and the more positive memories I have. And that's a big area where I'm journaling now, is I want to remember positives from my childhood and my growing up years and my young adult years. And so that's what I'm journaling about now that I've walked through these other steps before. Once you get to this point, this keeps going on forever and ever, hopefully. Then you really want to take the time to do this for somebody else. So listen to someone else's story. And give them the care. So those are the simple steps to start a healing process. And if you don't have somebody who you know directly, I know that a lot of churches offer common counseling. It's not necessarily like a psychological kind of counseling, more biblical counseling. I know that's something our church offers, and it's part of what we are a part of in a marriage ministry that we are a part of. And I just urge you to reach out to a friend that you know is trustworthy, a church leader, even your spouse, if you're close and you have a healthy relationship with them and they understand how to follow these guidelines, or willing to follow these guidelines. It's very easy to walk through this process without any professional help, which is why we really like using this technique. So now to the general journals. The journals I've been making have been centered around a particular era or several eras based on the person's age and the time that they're working through. So if you're working through childhood trauma, you might pick the decade or so that you were in that, and pick ephemera that reminds you of that decade, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the early 2000s. My intro video on here was for a young lady who was born in the late 90s, and the majority of her childhood was in the 2000s. This is going to be more of a general start, and I'll show you some of the pages that I pulled. I had a Henry Matisse art book, and I took the picture page. I know, this is what junk journalers do. We use every piece, so I cut it in half, and these will each be a page that adds some really nice color, and yet there's journaling space on the back where the simple line drawings are. I have a little golden book atlas page. I have this photo documentary book of people, and it has some nice quotes. I have an old physics book. I have an old drawing book. This was from a testing booklet that you would write an essay in. This is a graph paper. This is a star map. This is accounting ledger paper. This is a vocabulary test type of page. This is some 1990s paper that has some aging around the edges. Has a very nice feel to it for computer paper. This is a teacher gradebook page. Here's another accounting ledger page. I had a book of Art Deco pictures, so that's this. This is from a house design book. This was paper for printing out certificates. This is some very old onion skin typing paper, and I just love the sound of that. This was from a notebook that had tear out pages, and it has a nice aged color to it. I plan to use that for pocket. This is some resume paper, and I just folded in one side to make a pocket. And so these are going to be my basic pages to go into the book, and I'm going to do a hidden spine inside with sewn in signatures. So hopefully you'll join me again to see more progress on these being made and some of the other elements that I'll be adding in. And then a lot of the posting on Instagram is memory triggering little things and to get the conversation going with you. And so I appreciate everybody who has been commenting or answering the little questions on there about memory. If you have questions about this process, I'm happy to try and answer them. And I wish you a happy journey on your crinkled path, as different as each of our lives are. When we come together to support each other through a healing process, it's a beautiful thing. Be blessed, stay well, and I hope you'll come back for the next video.